Welcome, everyone, to the first of our 5 sessions as a study group on the white paper produced by the Center for Economic Democracy on social movement investing. Delighted to be here with all of you to launch this endeavor and to have members of the core team putting this together. Ariel Brooks, one of the authors, Kara Stonehouse has helped organize things, Madeline Charney and Nate Bixby from the Weaving and Events Circle of the Connecticut River Valley Bioregional Collaborative, and Paula from the R3.0 Funding Governance Blueprint, where Dita's also active, and Tom from that domain, Peter coming in from another door, David coming in through the TRCC window, and I think we're a small but mighty group, and I'm really looking forward to digging into this really profound and challenging paper together. I think something that is giving us a very clear and unvarnished message about not deluding ourselves that we can invest our way in the current investment paradigm out of the challenges we face, but we need really a radically different approach, and that there are bridges to be found from where we are to where we want to be, which I think is one of the most inspiring and hopeful and provocative parts of the paper, that it really points towards places to engage, regardless of where you are in the ecosystem, whether you're seeking funding, you're a capital steward, or someone who wants to play a bridge role. So Ariel's going to lead us off, I think, with a little bit of a framing. I'll say, just for the flow of our 90 minutes, we're going to have kind of a bit of a summary of the content for each section. We've broken the paper down into 5 sections. Then we'll go into breakouts we'll have a little Q&A after that. So like a 10-minute presentation. We'll do a Q&A for about 10 minutes. We'll go into breakouts for about half an hour, and in small groups talk about what resonated for us in this particular section, what didn't, questions we have, provocations, and then we'll come back as a full group to share some of what comes from that, closing thoughts. And that should.
I need to set my phone, but it actually responds to that.
Sorry, Nate, we're getting some background noise from you. So unless there are any questions about the agenda, I think we're ready to dive in and hand it over to Ariel to kind of ground us in the beginning of this paper and framework.
Do a little bit of introduction. Who's spotlighted? Okay. I actually I like to hide my self view. I don't know if others of you do that too, but it makes me much more present in the meeting and much less self-conscious about myself. I guess I want to start with a little bit of a story about the journey of being part of the social movement investing paper as one of the co-authors, and then talk a little bit about the introduction and the introductory content, but I may actually pause after the story to collect your questions and sort of intentions for being here.
Right.
Yes,
I'm noticing, Ariel, too, we had planned to do a quick breakout in little triads for people to just connect to each other.
Do that.
We do that first?
That would feel more grounding for me personally. Yeah, I'd love that.
We just kind of all sort of settle in. Get fully present. Let's do that. So we'll just create some random groups of 3 or more or less 3 and do that for 5 minutes. Let's see, 3, 4, 2, 3. Let's see what that does. No, okay. Looks like we're gonna have 2 groups of 4 and 1 group of 3 or something like that. So you'll get 4 minutes and then the 1 minute warning, and we'll see you back here in 5. Do we have a check-in question, Ariel? Just what drew you here?
Sounds great.
All right, here we go.
Right. So back to my story. So I worked at Center for Economic Democracy for 4 years. I just left at the end of January, and I'm now doing a combination of sabbatical and independent consulting. And Aaron Tanaka, who founded Center for Economic Democracy, also founded the Boston Ujima Project, which is very deeply connected with Center for Economic Democracy, which is the first in the country democratically allocated community loan fund based in Boston, Massachusetts. And when I joined CED at the beginning of 2018, we were also just really launching and formalizing the Boston Ujima Project. We accepted our first investments into Ujima at the end of 2018. And Aaron spent a lot of 2018 and 2019 traveling around the country talking about Ujima at these big conferences of impact investors. And they'd say, well, that's nice. Ujima's trying to raise $5 million. I put in $100,000, and that's not even a full percentage of my overall net worth or the money that I control. And so what else should I do if I'm trying to be more aligned with my capital? What else should I do? And so Aaron wrote the first version of the social movement investing paper in 2018, 2019. And it was like a 30-page document that was just some ideas about what to do with capital at the scale that people had access and control of beyond things like the Boston Ujima Project. And over the course of a few years, myself and Libby Cohn and others got more deeply involved in helping to steward and rewrite the paper. And I spent a lot of 2020 and 2021 gathering input from community partners, movement partners, folks on the capital side, folks in philanthropy. And over that time, there were a couple of really significant shifts. One was that when Aaron originally wrote the paper, the resist and the build sides, right? So the investments in actual projects and experiments, enterprises and community controlled, community owned work, that work was presented somewhat agnostically with the resistance work, saying whatever you can do any of these things, and that's good work. And what we really heard from the movement side folks is that that's not true. There's plenty of people who will throw their weight around on the resistance side without the discomfort of moving their money into ways that actually reduce their control over the money or the returns, and not enough people who are willing to invest directly in projects. So what the movements are calling for is for everyone who can do the investment in the build work. And if you have constraints, like you're a pension fund that's legally bound by the requirements to earn the most money that you can in order to make returns to their pensioners, then that's when you do the resistance strategy. So that was, as we rewrote and refined the paper, that was one of the big shifts was how to present the both and of the resist and the build, and the feedback we had gotten from movement partners about where to prioritize. And the other thing we realized was that there's, we tried. Everybody who read the early draft of the paper would be like, who's your audience? Like there's like 6 audiences. There's the movement side, there's the individual investors, there's the intermediary organizations and the organizers, there's the philanthropic organizations. And it's not going to be a short paper. We just came to terms with the fact that it wasn't going to be a short and pithy paper for a single audience, because what it is a invitation for cross-sectoral collaboration. It doesn't work without those different audiences coming together around this strategy, right? And so we just made peace with it being really long and ended up with these first two the introduction and the first 2 sections, which are really about the why take direction from movements, what are the different ways that you can take direction from movements, and then the later, and what are we prioritizing in our relationship with movements and what we're trying to invest in. And then the later sections being more technical about for people who are saying, yes, I'm with you, I'm ready, I want to shift all my capital. So how do I do that? And how do I do that in a way that's coherent, that has some logic to it, that's legible to the outside world? And, Ben, I appreciated your framing this as a piece that's saying we can't invest our way out of capitalism, but it is a very incremental strategy. It's not about tearing everything down and like getting the gold bars from the bank vault, right? It's fundamentally an incremental strategy about using the power of capital to move us further along the spectrum to community-controlled wealth and capital, with the hopes that further down the line we're able to actually dismantle the system, right? But I see it as an intervention point for relationships, for these collaborations to push the field and what's possible, liberate the capital from the current system in service of these projects. And then as we move further along, hopefully the relationships continue to change. So I'm going to stop there. And I would love to, we decided that rather than doing a one-on-one like question and answer, we'd like everybody to put questions and thoughts in the chat all at once. And then we'll all take a minute to review what went into the chat. And then we can do some sort of synthesis answering of questions in order to make better use of time and energy. So if folks want to put, it's really just in terms of making this study group useful to everybody, it'd be really interesting to hear why you're here. I know hopefully you got a chance to check in about that in your groups in more depth, but a sentence or two about what drew you, and then any questions or inquiries you had about the first section of reading. And I think we're inviting more clarifying questions here, and then we'll get deep into the more metaphorical and hypothetical questions in the discussion group. So, but if there's questions I can answer about what you read, I'm happy to do that before we get into breakouts.
Nate, was it Andrew is with you? If typing isn't easy and you want to just speak your question too, we're just going to take all the questions first, and then.
We're almost at the house, so we'll be changing formats and be more coherent.
So far, I'm seeing it's an interest in changing the system and in reframing. Can you say more about the incrementalism of this approach versus other more radical approaches? Interest in the idea that power structures only have as much power as we give them. Taking back our capital is a good place to regain a true say. Can you say more about using capital to challenge capitalism and is it capitalism we are challenging or neoliberalism? Some reasons why people are here also. What effect, if any, did the pandemic have on your creating, processing the report? And the desire to learn the nuts and bolts of building social movement investment vehicles. Is regulated capitalism or natural capitalism okay? Interest in collectivism. How do we prevent the system that we want to transform from hanging on even longer? How do we minimize bringing in the blind spots inherent to capitalism? Interested in understanding how to develop pathways of connection among funders and communities and exploring ways to bring the funders into the actual project in communities. How to carefully navigate the intersection of the old capital world and the new worlds arising. Ultimately, land is everything.
raise a hand if you're still thinking or typing. That's some juiciness. That's like 2 days worth of conversation right there.
Oh, the blue goo.
I'll speak something in since I'm still not set up. I like Robin Wall-Kimmerer's idea of the honorable harvest, and I'm wondering if that is a concept that weaves its way in here somehow.
Cool. So fewer questions about the content of alignment with movements and more about the underlying approach to capitalism and where this strategy fits in a transition from the current system to a different system, right? And then also the themes about actually being in relationship with community. So those are the two big themes that I see coming out of these questions that I'm going to address. And then overall, I'm glad everybody has these in your chat thread because you can dig into them deeper in small groups, and then we'll come back and also have a synthesized discussion. So moving from the very big, I'll address sort of where this fits within capitalism piece first, and then talk about the community a little bit. So I've been thinking a lot about what I originally called the idea of ethical horizons, and now I've been thinking about them as horizons of radical imagination, and the idea that we can inhabit any system we build with the spirits of colonialists and violence, right? Like we could build the most beautiful circle-based structure and we could inhabit in a way that was violent and that had similar outcomes to what we found now, right? So at the core of what we all need to be about is consciousness shift. And how do we actually engage in the consciousness shift to inhabit whatever system we build in a different way? So at the highest level, when people are talking about neoliberalism or capitalism or regulated capitalism, right? Like it doesn't really matter what version of the system we have if we inhabit it in the way that we're currently inhabiting it. And so to me, all of this work of social movement investing is practice. Like, you know, we have the movement generation, the heart learns what the hands do, right? So what do we actually practice in our relationships? And then how does what we practice lead to transformation, lead to consciousness shift, lead to different structures and systems, right? So I think the social movement investing work can be practiced in ways that are totally shallow and not in any way different than the current versions of investing, or they can be practiced in ways that are deeply relational and transformational. And through that relationship and collective learning and cooperation, we all shift, right? So, so that brings us to the actual relationship with communities, right? Like, yeah, somebody mentioned some movements aren't accountable to communities. Like, this is the part where we inhabit systems in ways that are violent and negative happens in all spaces in our system. So at the core of these first two sections, we're arguing that it's deeply about relationship. It's about being in a relationship with your community, directly building relationships across people with capital and people without capital to be in conversation about what's needed. And that requires the people with capital to do a lot of deep work. And it also requires the people without capital to be thinking about how they want to be in a relationship and inviting folks into strategy, and how they're learning on their own side about how to use the power of capital to get land back to communities or to Native peoples, how to, you know, how do we use the moment that we're in to do the best that we can with the strategy that we have. So that's like an answer, not answer, but it's really at the heart of what all of this is, right? And how do we practice these things in ways that are relational and transformational and not transactional? And that's what I have to say to send us off into groups as a starting inquiry. But I'd be really interested if other people have answers to any of the things that came up that feel, maybe Ben, if there's anything you want to say before sending people off.
Yeah, we have in our call flow a couple minutes if we want to hear a comment or two. I think the thing that really stands out for me is that somehow you're transcending the divide between sort of reform and transformation in a way, that's saying this is both practical and transformational, that the transformational consciousness can show up in very mainstream contexts, and the extractivist colonial oppressive mindset could show up in supposedly transformed ones if we just are changing the rules but not underlying that. So I love that you're saying it's all entangled together, and that we can play within the current system from a transformed space of consciousness, and relationships are at the heart of that. That makes such sense to me.
Right. So we're, to your point, Ben, about what's incremental about this, it's all incremental until it's transformed, right? Like, none of this is saying is that none of the strategies that's presented are transformative. They're all about using the current system and the mechanics of the system and capital and resources as we understand them in different ways, right? And then what, as we practice that, the back to the original idea I talked about with horizons, I just believe in my own journey, even just in the last 4 or 5 years with this work, new horizons that I'd never imagined opened up to me. Like, for example, in the land thread, it's not that we need to give all the land back. Our ultimate aim ultimately needs to be abolishing land ownership. That's the current horizon that I can see right now, right? Like, our fundamental orientation that anybody can own land is the brokenness. I couldn't see that horizon 5 years ago, and now I'm walking further down the path, and I don't know what comes beyond that, right? But we actually have to walk into the work and try it and figure it out and try to shift land back to people, and then see how, even as land going back is essential now, and is work that is learning work and necessary work, it's not actually going to transform. It's not transformative. It's still within the system. It's just moving around who has the resources, right? So we don't reach transformative until we fundamentally begin to change the rules. But speaking for myself, I couldn't see that until I walked into the first stages. So there's an invitation for us to walk into the first stages together.
Beautiful. I put a link to our notes doc in the chat, and if you scroll down a little bit, I just thought we could actually take notes while we're doing the reading before our calls, which I did, but didn't tell anybody else to do. So you'll see that at the top of the document. Then there's a call notes section, and I scribed a little bit of what we just heard from Ariel. And then there's room for 3 breakouts to take some notes in there. So encourage you to do that. And let's just capture the 3 questions that we had to consider, and we'll take a half hour in these groups, and then come back for about 10 minutes to talk about it together, and we have a little bit of what's next. So there are the questions, and again, here's the Google Doc. I'm taking some notes. And I'll set it up so you can move around too. You're all assigned. But I think, yeah. So you're in rooms, but you can also, if something comes up and you got to ask Ariel a question or something like that, you can do that too. So here we go. let's see. I thought we were supposed to, there we go. One unassigned participant. Oh, Nathan, I got to assign him. Whoops, no. Move to room 3. Oh, I put him with Madeline. Oh, well. Let me. It's good enough. There's no perfect way to do this. Hey, Gabriella, nice to see you.
Hi. I'm trying to get myself situated. Sorry.
All right.
I've shared the Blue Goose stuff with many people.
It is a great image, right?
I thought so. I mean, it just explained what I was trying to say, and like I love that it was out there, and yeah, it was cool. Yeah.
Forgot to change the timing of the breakouts, so
You're good. I have to apologize in advance. I started to read the things. Nate had told me about it, I think like Sunday night or something. And so I started to read it, but I didn't really get very far. So I apologize. Oh, we have 58 seconds left.
I'm going to reset the timer on it. So because we would have been interrupted in 5 minutes, and it's better, I think, to just start it again now. You picked a good week not to do the reading in advance, since it was pretty general and short this time around. I think some of the other sessions we'll be digging into the material and assuming people have some familiarity, but also knowing not everybody who shows up will do that.
Yeah. And people have different things at different times, but I was peeking around on the website though and trying to find the article to read, and I remember writing to Nate saying like, oh my god, I haven't heard anybody else talk about like the landless people. Like there's like a whole movement in Latin America about like landless folks, which is like, holy crap. I was super excited.
Hey everyone. Right, we are back from our breakouts, and I don't know that I think we planned about 10 minutes for this, so we have notes. Hopefully we're not going to do like full report outs from everybody, but maybe more popcorn style sharing. Does that sound good, Ariel? Of just things that struck you from your conversation, and maybe in particular provocations to take with us going forward as well.
For me, it's almost impossible to choose because everything was jewels nonstop. But there's something that is really, and it's the notion of like a pendulation or just a wave all the time of the danger of bringing capital and its destabilizing properties, and at the same time, when we are not using capital, it's being used to prevent transformation. So it's like, oh, let's use it also as a way to stopping its effects. So it's like, oh, squinting.
I'm taking some notes at the bottom underneath the breakout group notes. If anyone wants to do that too.
So I want to share something David said in our group that I think is really important. That really struck me. It was moving at the speed of trust, and that like really hit home, and it was really beautiful. And I think that's so much. It's the underpinning really to like how we ended the conversation in our group. where it's, there's a, in indigenous culture, the culture is of interdependence, and the web is always there, and the net of trust is already there. So much of what we're doing is like the way I understand it is like rebuilding that net of trust so that we can have a new culture. So thank you for that gem.
David also said that because of the relationship building he's been doing with the Wiyot people, the speed of trust for them now is quite fast.
To build on that and what Dita said about our group, with the sine waves that Ariel was sharing, to me, part of the lessons from some of the indigenous folks that we are honored to privileged to work with includes very different notions of space and time. I mean, I think it starts with land. We had a lot of conversation in our group about farming and land, but it's about the rhythms of the land. It's the linearity, the short-term focus that capital often brings to mind. So we're participating in a process that I think requires us to really fundamentally rethink those very concepts: movement, speed, acceleration, whether it's trust or whatever. These are concepts that are unfolding over these complicated space-time fields.
I don't know that it's complicated. I think it's just being. And I think that we're all imprisoned by the imperialistic, patriarchal, like hamster wheel. If you like really like go back to like, the way the Gaelic people were, like everybody had an earth religion, everybody had a rhythm. Look at Waldorf education, right? All of it, right? That's from an Austrian perspective. It all has a rhythm. It all has a flow. And when we let go of the shoulds and the have tos, and we just stop, right? Like I have to check myself every freaking day. Like, right. I'm not saying that like I've like figured this out, but I know that that's where that comes from. It's just being in the moment. It's being alive. It's doing the thing that you need to be with each other. We're all decolonizing ourselves, right? That's the beauty of it. We're all decolonizing ourselves.
Another jewel I want to bring in was to decapitate capitalism. Thank you, Peter.
And don't lose your own head in the process.
Yes, but keep your heart pumping.
I think I was just closing up with Paula. We broke out into smaller groups to do more reading. Paula and I continued talking a little bit, and Joe Brewer's experiment in Biochara, Colombia came up, and the question of how well does the word land trust translate outside the United States? Basically, I kind of gave a history of nonprofits and anti-colonial legal structures, ending with land trusts and questions that I was holding. And Paula was like, well, this is such an American thing. And it shed some light on Joe coming to Colombia and trying to form a land trust. But then the question was, well, how is that working? What is local? And then that came to, well, there's actually 7 different countries here. And so, okay, there's the bioregionalism, there's the Caribbean, there's the Andes, there's the Amazon. And all that's a kind of a geography that affects how money flows, how money needs to flow, and how wealth is held, how it's allowed to soak into the soil of a community in all the metaphorical richness of that, in a way that the community of life can hold more life. So full circle to the legal question, well, Joe's doing this stuff, it's like a lab, right? There's all sorts of questions that this paper impacts on. There's a network of communities that's represented in the voices in this paper. That's a living community that Joe should be able to draw on, and that should be able to look at Joe's work and the people there, not just Joe. That group of people, that life community should be able to draw on this, what's happening in this study group even. It feels like this study group could be kind of a gestation of an even more living community around these issues. So that's check.
One of the questions in our group was how to get started where I am with the resources that we have and the connections that we have or don't have. Perhaps David lives in a place with a federally recognized tribe that is highly functional and capable of leading transformational work. That isn't the case in many places in the US or around the world. I think there's a sense in this paper, there was so many different groups involved, and I have some sense from the TRCC work of how much there are interconnections among those different groups and relationships, and so there's this whole, I can imagine sort of being on the outside of that. And in some sense, I feel like I am, even though I have those connections to a certain degree, and saying, wow, there's this intact community of practice and learning and a coherence there. And how it is the path forward to connect into that and be resourced through that, or is it about creating something, modeled on what's seen there, but grounded in different contexts in different places? And I think there's room for both. Is what it seems like. It's always both and, not either or, right? In the shift. But I am struck by how what it can be like to be on the outside and say, wow, this is such beautiful and powerful work, and I, as an investor or a local community activist, am kind of on the outside of all of this that took years to get to where the speed of trust is fast, for example, took decades or generations. So there is maybe a sense of this being hard to approach from a starting.
So maybe if we're thinking about it from a sacred perspective, the speed of trust is also moving on a different schedule, right? So Nate, I'm going to tell the story of how, when we first connected. All right, cool. So he had seen my LinkedIn profile. I don't really ever look at it or update it, send me a message. I knew who he was from other friends or whatever, but didn't really know him. And we had this really kind of it was a veiled conversation. I was like, well, what do you want me to do exactly? I thought he was hiring me to do something. I was like, what? what is it exactly that you need? He's like, I don't know yet, but we're going to work together. I know we are. You're going to help me build something. And I was just like, okay, sure. And, we kept crossing paths, and it was like, we had to almost learn a way for our hearts to communicate, right? Like it took a while for it to like sort of sync up, and the timing of it happened in a way that like couldn't have been planned, couldn't have been constructed by like our human minds. It just like different aspects of healing kept happening like between each other and with each other. Like we're, our own little islands in New Haven, but we're like helping each other heal through conversations and trading notes. And in that process, we're also both dreaming of this other way of being. And we just keep wanting that to be the case. And so now we're at a point where like, I think of something and he says it, or he thinks of something and I say it, like where we're sitting in front of each other and just waiting a turn to speak. And like, it's like lightning, it's it's truly like on the cellular level, right? Like all of the electrons are communicating for us at this point. And it's really neat. And like, I just said to him, I'm like, so we're going to put my house in the trust, right? And like, we had talked about it before. A year ago, I would have never said that to somebody, but I trust him. I know that he has like my children's interest in mind and like would never make me homeless. Do you know what I mean? And so like, but that's a kind of trust that spirit brought to us. Like, that's not a trust that was man-made. Right. And so
4 years ago,
yeah, it was right after I got divorced.
The trust, and it's incomprehensible to me how we could understand each other so instantly and well now. The arc of that was, 3 years of very little contact, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden something came in, the expansion of the local regional airport came up. And that just catalyzed all these levels of our connection that are
the spirals happened.
And really breathtaking.
Mm-hmm.
Some ancient stuff in there even.
Yeah. And we're not in control of it. I think like that's sort of the beauty of it. Like our hearts were praying for a solution, right? Like our hearts were asking for a way forward for our earth, for our community. And somehow like some magic happened because it wasn't us. It just happened. We were just chosen to do the things or something. I don't know.
I appreciate that. What I was going to say in response, Ben, is I feel like, back to Peter's thing about decapitating capitalism, right? Capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism are fundamentally systems of the mind, and we're imprisoned in the mind. And all of these things, all of the narratives that we have that keep us from acting come from that, right? Like that it's not big enough, it's not a big enough intervention, or I'm not included in it, or I'm, I can't, how do I even begin? I'm outside, right? And so I do think, in my group, I shared that I've been experiencing a lot of wide pendulum swing or like big sine waves of going back and forth between believing that the only way forward is the very intimate, like what Gabriella and Nathan just described, and that the only way to the scale of transformation we need is that level of intimacy across everything, right? But that doesn't start with like wanting something that's far away, right? It starts with like, who is your neighbor? What is happening in your town? Who do you actually know? What are you yearning for? And then listening to the yearning and being open to that kind of connective magic, instead of like, that kind of connective magic feels weird to me in my brain. My internalized capitalism is telling me that is woo-woo bullshit, that I need to move in my linear way, right? So if we can't like open our hearts a little bit more to just trying it, but it's fucking hard. We're all afraid. So we're imprisoned.
He reached out to me. So to clarify, he reached out to me through LinkedIn, and he had seen my organizing work. right? So LinkedIn is right, is from a professional perspective. And so he wanted to talk about work stuff.
Right.
So it did start like in, just sort of like, she has some skills that might be helpful for maybe an idea that's it was like not even a seed yet, was it, Nate? It was just like something that was out there in the ether that wanted to become a seed. But it was like, I think it was more of like, these are things that I need to do. But that's why we couldn't communicate well at first. We had to like crack through. So here's an interest. The indigenous people in Peru, when they plant the seeds, there's like a special ceremony, and they sing at a very high pitched vibration, like intentionally, like it's ear piercing. And so it's supposed to crack open the seed shell to get to the heart of it. And so maybe this is actually, I'm going to cry, that maybe Tweed in a way was that like high pitched scream, right, from Mother Earth that allowed the shell of how we were thinking through things like in structures. And like, we're both really into process. We're super wonky and dorky that way, where like, how are things going to fit? And here's all the pieces. But we had to break through that. And maybe the expansion of the airport was that scream, right? Or that high pitched sound that kind of like broke through and allowed us to communicate from a heart place. But it didn't start there. It didn't start there at all. So it just happened.
So words like sacred and soul, sacred economics, some of that circulated in our small group as well. And you used the word magic. I do believe that part of the process we're involved in is getting out of the head, of course, as we've talked about already, but also this process of being playful, being imaginative in ways that it's not just that our minds have been colonized, but our very souls have been colonized, you might say. These are very loosey-goosey kinds of concepts, but that's only because that's what we think they're loosey-goosey. They've been fundamental to human beings, except for our rather exceptional period here during modern capitalism.
Colonialism makes pejorative anything that threatens it. And the more intense the threat is, the darker the painting of that. Ricardo Levins Morales is a brilliant artist and organizer in Minnesota, and I won't regale you with his amazing story, but he said, your enemy always tells you where their weakness is. It's that which they pay the most attention to.
And what they make fun of the most, right? Not to be crass, right? But people say, don't be a pussy. But really, so what they're afraid of is the womb.
Or don't be so childish. Stop playing, because if you play, you might be free.
That might be a good note to wrap up on. So we're coming to the end of our 90 minutes. Thank you so much, Ariel, for framing this for us today, and everyone for your presence and contributions and heart-centered energy. And we're back same time next week to dig into chapter 1. I think this is the biggest chunk of reading that we have, maybe, or one of the bigger chunks. On the pages and the link to the document for anybody that didn't have that are all in the blog post that we put up on the Now What website. I'll drop that in the chat. This, we talked about sacredness. No, it's actually, I think it's Is it chapter? I thought technically it's, well, it's page, whatever starts on page 28. I don't know if that's technically chapter 1 or chapter 2, but that's where we're starting. The page numbers are there in the blog post. We're here at this same, on the same Zoom line as well. And I almost feel like we need something ceremonial to just close the space to honor sort of the need to be in a more sacred and heart-centered and trust-based relationship, but I don't have it prepared.
When I was teaching Kundalini yoga, we ended with Satnam, and it means like truth is your name. And it's a way to like call in your highest version of you, like your truest version of yourself. And we ended with 3 Satnams. So the first Satnam was, when you do it, you pull in, from like your root chakra. So you go Sat and you bring it up all the way to your third eye. And Nam is supposed to feel like a beautiful bubble around you, so you exhale Nam. And so there's 3. The first one, the way I was taught it, is supposed to be for whoever comes to mind that needs healing. The second one is for yourself, because you can't help if you're not healed yourself, right? And then the third one, I liked to explain it to my students as imagine that you can see the earth like a blue and green marble, and that as you say Satnam, there's like little golden flecks of light, or if you want to envision it in like pink loving light, whatever light, but you're like engulfing the earth in like healing and peace and light and good wishes. Did you guys want to try that? Does that sound good to everybody? Sure. Yeah. All right, so unmute yourself so we can cheer each other. So we inhale to prepare. Oh, and if you want to do it like hardcore, you rub your hands together and then you bring your thumbs to your heart. So you want to create heat and then equal pressure on both palms. And you're at heart center. Inhale to prepare. Exhale. And then we're going to start. Sa. Nam. And then hold yourself in light. Sa. Nam. Nam. Now the earth. Sa. Sa. Nam. Thank you for doing that.